This is my second time at this conference. It was 2019. I was here last time. So it's a pleasure to be back with you. And what I'm going to try and do over the next 20 minutes, my timer hasn't started, so I'm going to just crack on if I may, is to talk to you about a methodology that I think, if we get it right together, will help us address some of these challenges. So I think this method of critically appraised topics that I'm going to talk you through will help us improve our research awareness, and it will enhance our critical appraisal skills as a group of clinicians, academics, patients, consumers of healthcare. I think it will help us create our networks and improve our relationships that we're doing here today. It'll improve our quality of care and build research capacity as well. So this model that I'm going to propose to you is called critically appraised topics. And I'm going to talk you through what it looks like, what it feels like, some of the challenges, but some of the benefits that we've experienced in this methodology in our journey that we've probably been using, I think, since about 2003. So we've had quite a bit of experience. So what is a critically appraised topic, and what do we mean by this? And there is a prize for how many fluffy cats you can count during the presentation. But a cat to us in this context is developed from a clinical question. So it very often comes from clinicians with clinical dilemmas. And if we follow the process, it gives us a summary of the best available evidence in the form of a clinical bottom line. So we generate a question of interest from our patients or from our clinician practitioners or even from our researchers. And then we look to the evidence and we provide an answer to that evidence. And it's now proposed that this critically appraised topic in some hierarchies is proposed to sit just beneath systematic reviews because it does bring together the best research evidence to answer the clinical question you have of interest. So what do we do in this structured question? So imagine a clinician comes to our group with a clinical conundrum. We try and bring it together in a framework. And this is one framework we've used a lot. It's called PICO. I know a lot of you will be used to using this in your practice. But it encourages us to think about what is the population we're interested in? Is it the young people with osteoarthritis? What is the intervention we're interested in? What is the comparison or the control, and then the outcome of interest? And this helps us often take big, challenging clinical problems and refine them into a question that then our librarians can take and search, because we're looking for the very best evidence to answer this question. There are other forms as well, other models, in case your question isn't a sort of a treatment A versus a control type question. And I've put them, a couple of here for you to reference in the slides. So here's the process. So this is what it looks like. We come together as a group and we try and identify this clinical question and develop that PICO, so develop that structured answered question, where we then link in with our new best friends, the librarians, who search the evidence for us to look for the best evidence. This isn't a systematic review. It's not about uncovering every single piece of evidence that's ever been published. It's about finding the best evidence. And that might be a systematic review, it might be a randomized controlled trial, or it might be qualitative study. We then look at the evidence and we collaborate around sharing our experience around our knowledge of judging the methodology of this research. Is it good enough to change my practice for the next patient that walks through my door? Sorry, let me go back one. Apologies. We then develop the clinical bottom line based on the evidence, and we then consider the implications for practice. Do we need to stop doing something? Do we need to do something differently? Do we need to offer more of a particular type intervention? So we consider those implications. And of course, we have to continually evaluate because the evidence is always being produced. So you have to have a review process in so that you look back on these questions at a given time point, depending on how much evidence you think is published in that domain. So for example, osteoarthritis, if your question was about that, you might be looking to that on a regular basis. So we use what we call critically appraised skills program. This is a great tool for this process, but also if you're having journal clubs, it encourages you to focus on particular questions to enable you to judge the quality of that evidence. Do I change what I do for my clinicians tomorrow based on this evidence? And these take you through a series of questions to help you start to judge the quality of the research. After a few times through this process, you generally have these questions in your mind, so you don't need to refer to them. But they're great for new people starting this process. So the links are on the slides for you. And this is what it looks like. So we have, for busy clinicians, for busy researchers who want to look at our question and look at our answer, the question is in the box and framed around that PICO we just talked about. And then the clinical bottom line is underneath. And this particular question was about virtual consultations. And again, you can see they're very contextual. This question was asked us literally when we went into COVID. We were doing more virtual consultations and clinicians wanted to know what was the impact of these on clinical outcomes. So that's what it looks like. Here's the question and the answer. So we give a sense of the quality of the evidence in that answer. So if you're a busy clinician, you want to see the question and the answer, there you go. It's all there for you. But actually in the document itself, what we try and do is give a little bit more information around, and these are the things that are covered on the actual document themselves. So the clinical bottom line, plain language summary. So we've started to include plain language summaries for patients who are now starting to look at these questions. Why it's important, and you'll see the list of things that are included if you want more detail. So you might want a bit more detail on the quality of the study, which we dig into. And you imagine for some clinicians, they've not been through this sort of process in terms of looking at the evidence, looking at the quality, and starting to make some judgments on the impact for them in their practice. But we recognise, like Daniel has said, we've got to get sort of with the technology. So, we write them in sort of visual documents, but also in vlogs. So we also try and do a video summary of what we found in the work. This is one of our advanced practitioners, Kirsty Thompson, who had a question around tendinopathy rehabilitation and did a suite of questions. So she's produced some vlogs to share the information about the cat. And we've also, we've got our happy cats and sad cats. We want to try and make some visual representation of what we're finding as well. So we recognise that sometimes these things can be quite text heavy. And so we try to make a visual representation of what we found in the evidence. So the cat possibilities, what if you follow this process, what are the things that we found that generally happen? Well, if you've got a happy cat, the green cat, then this might mean a changing in practice. If you found some evidence around an innovation or a technique that you're not currently using, but there's great evidence to support it, you may be sharing that with your clinicians to change practice. And you might be also sharing that with your stakeholders, so in terms of your healthcare commissioners, and share that information as widely as you can. If the evidence is of a quality that you're not comfortable with, you want to debate that with your clinical colleagues and consider if there's any implications for further research or any implications for your practice. And if you don't find any evidence, then you might want to kind of start to generate your own evidence. So local audits of your local practice, gathering patient stories. So, if you had to justify why you did particular interventions, what could you reach to justify what you are delivering to your patient groups? So we always think about the implications of these cats to a wide group of people, including our clinicians and managers. If they're sitting around the table with us, we can start to make decisions about what we do next. Our patient groups, our researchers are really interested in this process because they very often hear about the gaps in the research, gaps in practice, so it kind of then can help them identify the next question potentially. And our healthcare purchasers, so those people who are responsible for purchasing our health interventions. We've got a couple of examples here of where our clinicians have and patients have worked together on information leaflets. So this is an information leaflet following a a CAT around tendinopathy rehabilitation. It was designed by clinicians and patients for patient groups because we identified from the question we didn't have any information. So co-produced with our patients to help them understand a little more about the condition. And this was one created by a group in Leeds who had set up a group following our methodology, and they've been looking at injection therapy, so steroid injection. So again, produced a visual to try and help their clinical colleagues. So lots of information can be produced to help support ongoing practice. All our CATs, I think we've probably answered over 200 questions. We've got at least 8 groups that are working on these across the country. And, all our work is housed on this website. So please do take a look. And videos are on there as well. This is just a peek at some recent questions we've been asking. So one is about the risks of intra-articular steroid injections. One is about ultrasound guided injections. That's a current topic that's of interest to our CAT groups. And there's been a question around a group wanting to understand the virtual offer for people post-total knee replacement versus face-to-face. So you can see that these questions are almost the finger of the pulse of what's happening in current clinical practice and the changes in practice. So if I was to reflect just briefly on the keys to success, if you were thinking about establishing a group, definitely these things are worth considering. So there's definitely been a consistency in approach in terms of leadership of these CAT groups. The librarian has been our new best friend. So, we've worked with our librarians around the searches, and they've given us so much support. The researchers that sit alongside us in terms of giving us academic support have been fantastic. So I always think of the sort of clinical leadership, the academic leadership in terms of our researchers and our librarians are the 3 cornerstones of these groups. It's collaborative, so no one person has to have all the answers. So it feels like you learn together and learn the world of the researcher, and the clinician starts to understand that, and you understand the world of the NHS, and the researchers understand that. So there's a lot of collaborative learning about each other's landscapes. Getting the right people around the table is key because you can make changes in practice really rapidly if you've got clinicians and clinical managers. And buy-in for CPD, of course. So we've written for different types of publications for this process. We've written how-to and why would you type manuals, but we've also written for publication around, sharing our experience in a more sort of academic sense around these, what we've called communities of practice or CAT groups. So I will whistle through a couple of examples for you, if I may. So a couple of years ago, a clinician was really interested in a particular type of shoulder exercise for shoulder pain. Was there any evidence? We couldn't find any evidence at the time for these particular exercises. So that meant that we were then quickly engaged with our researchers who did want to find an answer to this question. So we became part of a randomised controlled trial to find the answer to this question, and that was then undertaken and published. So this particular CAT question was the start of a suite of interactions, relationships that then got the answer to the question we were interested in. Great example for our researchers. Here's a clinical example. We have long waits for patients who need an injection into the base of the thumb for osteoarthritis. So we started to say, why do we need ultrasound-guided injections? Can we do this clinically? We looked to the evidence around a CAT question and found really at the time there was no difference. And so what we did was to change practice in our pathways and offer patients this opportunity earlier on in our pathway. So it reduced waiting times, it enhanced our training, and so really improved the patient experience. And one more is about a question that came from an ortopedic surgeon around, I don't know whether the operations I'm doing for subacromial pain syndrome, is it as good as physiotherapy? So we asked the question, and he was involved in the process. And of course, we found that, that physiotherapy evidence for these patients for exercises is really, there is consistent evidence to support that. So this helped us think about, how do our patients transition through our pathway to make sure we get that good quality rehabilitation? So just a kind of a couple of examples there that have shown the impact of these sorts of questions. And we've then taken the kind of the step to gain a bit of confidence to write to our commissioners now to say we think this is what should be happening for patients with shoulder pain. So what next? And in terms of our perspectives, I'd like to kind of suggest to you that all of these folks should be involved in this process and hear about either the questions that are being asked or indeed the results of the questions. And I'm going to introduce you to Pat. Here's Pat. Pat joined us. She is a patient, and Pat joined our cat group. So we now have Pat's cats. Pat wanted to ask us the first question of this group around shoulder pain. And she was really interested in terms of the exercises that she was being advised to do. Was there evidence around those exercises? So she asked a question and we helped Pat through the process. And this is Pat's reflection on being involved in the group and has brought a real sense of, well, we need to make sure this information is understandable to all. So she encouraged us to include the plain English summary in all our cats now. So in summary, thank you so much for your time and listening to me, sharing this with you. And I think if we get this process right, it reduces clinical variation because what it does is help us to kind of get the sort of best for our patients. It increases our research awareness and enhances our critical appraisal skills. It builds relationships and you learn from each other and you share information. It builds and improves the quality of care that we're offering to our patients. And it also builds research capacity. People who've been on our CAT groups now are doing PhDs and are really stimulated to carry on their research journey. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the session. I look forward to chatting with you more over lunch and over dinner tonight. Thank you.